Hi there. To tie in with the new year, happy 2024 everyone. This is my retroactive look at the top TV series of 2023. Due to its length, I'm doing it as an audio-only podcast. And this is entirely subjective, let me stress that. What fascinates me about the streaming age is the concept of taste clusters. That Netflix and others have explained this, that it's not something they invented. They discovered that there's certain groupings, taste clusters of people who like Game of Thrones would tend to like other fantasy shows, but then again, because there's multiple overlapping categories, might also like Succession, or the example they used was, for some reason, people who like Riverdale also like Scandinavian crime dramas. The concept of taste clusters, and sometimes they can surprise you, and what appeals to a given audience. Now, obviously, my channel is a Westeros Game of Thrones themed channel, but I want to see what are other things our taste cluster looks at. I think of it as a Venn diagram, that you might be into sci-fi fantasy action stuff, you might also be into Sopranos Succession type stuff. So this is by its nature subjective, but the goal is, loosely, what are other shows that can fuel discussion on Game of Thrones YouTube analysis channels during the off-season? That when we had a year and a half between seasons, what are other things we could podcast about that picked up our interest, that we're not, putting as much work into? Things that, like, Preston Jacobs, Red Team Review, Tony Teflon, and all the rest, what are other people into this genre reporting on? And it's interesting that, a lot of people are into the mainstream stuff like Star Wars, Marvel, but then there's other shows. What were we talking about? And also, what is the competition for Game of Thrones shows when they come back? So it's what's the competition? What do we talk about to fuel our channels during the off-season when there isn't that much filming news even coming out? And just what's part of the zeitgeist water cooler TV? And in a sense, it's all one big thing. It's an outgrowth, part of the big effort since 2019, that we've had an outgrowth of the search for the next Game of Thrones, which of course I think is House of the Dragon, though realistically, I've said before, I think in terms of what's fueling YouTube discussion, the big thing is the ongoing Star Wars and Marvel metaverses, is what people, talk about in your mainstream entertainment stuff day to day, because they have so many shows coming out. That's what fuels things, but in terms of what should we be talking about, what shows have gotten bad that we're not talking about anymore, this is for the YouTube crowd. It's entirely subjective. I'm interested. Tell me in the comments, what were your top shows? This isn't an objective, I'm not going, these are definitively the best. It's subjectively what I thought were the best, or most talked about, top, in general. It's a broad term. And tell me if you think, no, there's this other thing we were really obsessing over. It's what were we obsessing over more? And like I said, there's this divide between what they call high culture and low culture, of the Emmy award level Succession type shows, and then the fandom level Star Wars Marvel type shows, which don't get into that. Rarely do you get a show like Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, like The Last of Us and Andor were the only other sci-fi fantasy things that have recently covered and overlapped into both sides of the spectrum. So we'll see what we do. So it's what are other shows that, like a Preston Jacobs or Alt Shift X type, would be talking about. One thing I really stressed last year when I did my last New Year's thing for 2022 is I said this year was the end of the streaming boom. And you have to remember that you have to look at the larger scale trends, that 2019 through 2022, everyone was scrambling to launch their own new streaming platform and throw money at new projects. That this all started, the best case example and biggest launch was Disney Plus in fall of 2019. And then for the next 12 months, everyone else was putting out theirs, like Apple came out, and everyone wanted their own flagship show to be the next Game of Thrones scale thing. And even other older streamers like Netflix, to a lesser extent Amazon, were increasing their budgets to compete with that. So obviously Netflix existed before this, but the streaming boom where they were throwing money at new projects was 2019 through 2022. And the absolute end phase of that was fall 2022, when House of the Dragon and Lord of the Rings Rings of Power came out, because there's overlap to this. But even as they were already wrapping up production, the boom ended when Netflix had negative subscriber growth for the first time in spring of 2022. The phase we're in now is the contraction phase of mergers. It paralleled that spring 2022, we both had Netflix reining in its spending, and for the last year they've been gutting a lot of their projects, particularly their animation department. And Discovery merged with, bought out, Warner, so now it's Warner Discovery for HBO Max and everything. And soon Paramount is going to be merged. This is spiraling. I was starting to script this around Christmas break. Last 2 weeks alone, people are resigning from Paramount. They are now quite openly saying they're hearing bids for things. I'm going to make a separate video about that, a dedicated state of the industry thing about Paramount and Netflix and money and stuff. But for right now, that we won't see quite as many big shows coming out. The competition is thinning. And on top of that, there's this chapter break at both ends of the spectrum that in terms of just popular shows, the spending is contracting. And we're also in a new era at the high culture end of awards level shows. It stunned me when I sat down and crunched the numbers. I've said this more than once. Since Game of Thrones ended in early 2019 through 2022, that same era, half a dozen shows got half a dozen of all major Emmy nominations. Nominations, not wins, in terms of best drama, director, writing, actor categories. And really the top four, the other ones were just tacked on. The Crown, Succession, Better Call Saul. Remember the Emmys last weekend? That was the last Emmys all three of those were eligible for. And it was won by Succession. Just looking at the nominee list, this is the final season for the three biggest hitters of them all. Ozark was Netflix's old heavy hitter, and other than The Crown, that ended last year. So the top four, and the other two were like Handmaid's Tale and The Morning Show sometimes get acting categories. They weren't as big as the other ones, but this year was a huge chapter break. Because of the production overlap, that stuff they ordered at the tail end of the boom, we might be seeing now, like Fallout is coming next year, but we're going to see a lot of belt tightening, on the one hand, for mainstream shows. And on the other side, it's a chapter break, at least, for so many other big Emmy-level mainstays just ended. What's the next big thing? So we are, in both cases, standing at the precipice of a big new era, which we were slowly starting to transition into this year, though it's really going to hit more next year. And I haven't even started mentioning the goddamned combined writers and actors strike. Some people saying, oh, this is the first time they've had a combined strike since 1960. It was basically the first combined strike since 1980, because I looked at, the writers striked, and then 6 months later the actors striked over the same reason. Still, 1980 was the last time they really had to deal with a combined strike by both. And even then, it was still, the last writer's strike, 2017, was still 15 years ago. So the difference being that the writers lost the last strike. They won this strike, that you have to pay us money for these things. They just punted in 2007. The studios won and said, we don't need to work out how to pay you for streaming services. And what we saw in the 2010s was studios cutting corners everywhere, not hiring enough writers, not giving them enough training, paid training. And that was part of a general trend, and that's kind of one of the things that hurt Game of Thrones, was it was normal and accepted to have untrained people in charge, and it should not have been accepted at that level, but it was part of a wider trend. So just looking at the trends of everything, things will be changing now in terms of the behind-the-scenes production structure will be different. Also because the boom and bust cycle now, like Disney said, we cranked out too many shows, obviously the reviews are bad, we're going to start revamping how we do them behind the scenes. We'll see what comes out, but at least they've acknowledged the problem. So, point of all this is we're at quite the big chapter break here. We're standing on the precipice, and what is there for the humble neighborhood YouTube channel to talk about? Because I was late on this, because I had to cover all that news about the three body problem thing, I meant to do this last week. But I didn't want to just put out like 2 hours of content every day, so I stretched that out over a whole week. Just yesterday, Preston Jacobs and Red Team Review put out their combined podcast on what they felt were the top shows of 2023 with their friend Ness. And they only did a top 4 because they only counted shows they personally watched. My listing includes the top talked about things, and I don't live under a rock. I know when things got good reviews. And I'll mention it because I said it's subjective. It's what are people talking about and feel is worth talking about, not necessarily what I felt was good, but it's not a strict ranking. That Preston and Carmine said we didn't include Succession because we didn't get a chance to watch it yet. They both wanted to watch, Carmine wanted to watch Wheel of Time Season 2, but he hadn't had the chance yet. Conversely, I haven't seen Foundation Season 2 yet, which they ranked very highly. I literally just started watching that show because, Christmas gift, I got a 3-month Apple subscription from someone. So I'm quickly going through all the shows on it. And I literally just watched the Season 1 finale yesterday. I hurried to get to it so I could talk about it. And everyone says Season 2 of that show is better. I trust their judgment over there because all three of them, Preston, Carmine, and Ness, they only did a top 4 because they were only doing shows they watched, and the general top shows they listed were The Last of Us, Loki Season 2, which was the final season, so it's not ongoing, but it shows that there's life in Marvel if you do it right, Foundation Season 2, and Invincible Season 2. Obviously, I have these on my listing here. But like I said, this is subjective. I want to hear what you think, and just what are the things we're talking about. If I just read off a 10-point list, that wouldn't have any value in it compared to my long-form ramble here. It's more about the discussion than the ranking. Now, last year, luck of the draw, I was struggling to come up with a top 10, so I did a combined live action plus animation, and some of them are relatively obscure shows, and I don't like treating animation as somehow separate from live action. I hate it when people say, oh, it's not real drama, like Invincible is an amazing drama. But because I wanted to talk about everything that came out in the past year that we were discussing on YouTube, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to do the top 10 live action shows, then the top 10 animated shows, and then I'm going to combine the lists into the combined top 10 at the end of it. Recognize that when I get to the bottom of the list, like 6 through 10 on both lists, is more of an honorable mention kind of thing. But then I do, okay, overall, these were the top 10 animated or live action. Because I'm thinking in terms of what competes against other things at Emmy Awards as well, and these would be different categories, unfortunately. Just how they roll. So, diving into it now, and I'm doing this all in one take. We're 13 minutes into this, but this is a year in review podcast. And I'm doing it audio only so you can listen to it while you're commuting or whatever, on the train or something. So, top 10 live action shows. Number 1, The Last of Us on Max. One of the few shows that has truly achieved crossover appeal, both in terms of awards and drama. I mean, high culture and low culture. That fandom was obsessing over it. It was very well made in terms of the writing, acting, cinematography awards, and the popularity. And obviously, Succession beat them at every award thing. Unfortunately, that it's Golden Globes and the Emmys have different cutoff dates. The Golden Globes goes by calendar year, January 1st to January 1st. The Emmys go from May to May. And obviously the Emmys were last week because they were delayed because of the strike, but the cutoff date is still every May, so that's why The Last of Us did better in terms of technical awards and things at the Globes and stuff, but that'll be ongoing. The question does obviously come up. My only regret is that this is the only problem I have with The Last of Us. It's not really a problem. That season was perfect. It was art. I don't see how any subsequent seasons can match up to Season 1. I will be posting a standalone review of The Last of Us. That last year I said, these are what I feel were the top shows, but the top 3 were, for me, because I'm not a general channel, I'm a Game of Thrones channel, I said, the only things really worth talking about were House of the Dragon, Sandman, Neil Gaiman's Sandman was amazing, and Star Wars Andor. Those were my top 3. And I said Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power is like number 10 or something. I reviewed it out of obligation as a fantasy fan, just because I know the material off the top of my head and I wanted to yell about it. But in terms of the top three, that was it last year. That this year, the only other thing I'm compelled to make a standalone review for will be The Last of Us, which will come right after this in a few days. And rather, the way I structured the review isn't just a review, but I phrase it as, these are things The Last of Us did right, that Game of Thrones did wrong, as an adaptation that has zombies in it, and the mechanics of that. It's 5 specific points, but I'll get to that. That the other thing is, shows don't run that long anymore. They come out every year and a half and you get 4 to 5 seasons at most. Succession only ran 4 seasons. How many seasons will The Last of Us run? They said they're going to split the second game into 2 seasons. So there's going to be at least 3, and they are working closely with the writers of the game, so maybe 4, but they'd start running out of source material. That will this be like True Detective Season 1? We thought assuredly this will be a franchise when it was an anthology. You have no guarantee it's going to be good. Actually, like Season 4 that just came out, but it's hit or miss. So I don't know if The Last of Us will be able to keep up the momentum of Season 1, because it was very good in isolation. It was based on a standalone video game. The second game was divisive. I thought it was following the themes they had set out, for good or ill. I didn't feel it was a cheat. It's just, we're following the themes of the cycle of revenge, the horrible things people do in the name of love, in a survival context. I got it, and from a plot and a gameplay mechanics, always great, but I do think they have smart people running The Last of Us as a show. And in terms of the production design and the direction, Craig Mazin is a genius. He did his Chernobyl miniseries was amazing. Last of Us Season 1 was a juggernaut. Let's see how the next seasons do. Thankfully for House of the Dragon Season 2, the strikes have delayed Last of Us Season 2 so much that they will not be competing against each other head-to-head at the next Emmys. They'll be in different cycles. Instead, House of the Dragon 2 will be up against Andor Season 2, but we're not going to go head-to-head with The Last of Us. Arguably Show of the Year, if not for number 2 on my top 10 list, Succession. Swept all the awards. I only just started watching this, and because I have no time, and I watched some of Season 1, I started it. I'm spoiled for everything. I'm more focused on a lot of the directors and cinematographers on Succession are HBO mainstays from their stable of directors. So when I saw, there's this director, Mark Mylod is a major director on there. He used to work on Game of Thrones. Or Andrei Perec won an award for Succession. He's going to join House of the Dragon Season 2 as a director, direct episode 6. So I'm watching it and I'm enjoying it. I'm looking at, they have really good cinematography. I'm looking at the camera stuff from from production standpoint. So I'm kind of stepping back, though. It is pretty well done, the story. It's sort of, on one of many things it does, is examine how, it's a big criticism of the major media companies. Like the Redstones and all those, and the HBOs of the world, and the family-owned Murdochs, basically, of, among other things, that the guy in charge really just thought he'd live forever, and he never bothered to train his successors, and they are unfit to lead now. That on a meta level, HBO was like that. I can't believe they made this show, because it is so critical of HBO itself in a backhanded way. The old HBO that greenlit it. On a meta level, HBO was really made for the mid-90s through 2000 Soprano era by Chris Licht, and he got booted out in a scandal. And when Game of Thrones came around, the Richard Plepler who was in charge, he was not prepared to run this. He was their documentary division guy. And they really didn't plan for what happens when the head guy leaves suddenly. They were unprepared for it. And the inadequate successors is a big thing of it. That just as they ran their thing into the ground, they were so indebted, they had to sell it to... I think when Succession was greenlit around 2019, they had to sell Warner to AT&T at the time, who then sold it to Discovery. And I think they just weren't paying attention to what shows they were greenlighting. They didn't realize how much Succession was making fun of that corrupt corporate world. And you're not preparing your successors. It's all about me. And I mean, I also skipped to the ending where they're talking, like the funeral scene is amazing, where they're talking about things they never revealed the whole show, and why was this guy the way he was, and just that speech about, and I think so much about this when I think about when you hear about these executives, the corruption among them, and sometimes even showrunners, that yeah, they had a hard life, they could have chose not to, and they had this meagerness in them that eventually just somehow, and it wasn't all at once, there was a meanness that grew, and they made a mean estimation of the world. That was just a beautiful on-spot speech. It was sharp, it was critical, it said what needed to be said, and it's not just, oh, you're not going to get bonus points in heaven, it's you are stunted as a human being. But also just in terms of the production quality and everything. Now, I'm not as obsessed with the back and forth between the children. I'm into the social commentary and the cinematography stuff. But all of that, just that is sharp writing, that is sharp production, and yes, everyone was talking about it. You can't avoid, this thing just swept the Emmys once again. There was season 3. At the season 3 Emmys, there were 5 nominees for Best Director. All 5 were Succession episodes. This thing was a mainstay. I mean, it arguably outgrew The Crown, which people say dragged in its later seasons, which also just ended, versus Succession was really from beginning to end. I'm putting it number 2 because you get points for you stuck the landing. That phrase, you stuck the landing, that having your final season end that strong is a mark of success, not just dragging it. And they said we didn't want to drag it out forever and dilute it. So these are both Max shows, of course, and they aired back to back right before the strike made TV go away for months because everyone delayed their schedule. Last January, we had The Last of Us, followed immediately by Succession's final season. What a time that was for TV before we had 5 months of inaction. And then speaking of sticking the landing, number 3, Loki Season 2, the final season. They said we imagined the show as a 2-part thing like a book, winding up then winding down. That was a perfect ending for the character. It stayed... They could revisit him, I hope they don't, maybe cameo, but that fit perfectly as a narrative arc, and just production-wise and writing-wise, it was working on all cylinders, and the meta-level story... I keep saying meta-level, but the wider lesson to take away from that is it reminded us what Marvel TV shows can be capable of, and what they one day might be again. I mean, the only one I'd really knock on is Secret Invasion. The other ones were pleasant. The first crop was amazing. Not just WandaVision, even Falcon Winter Soldier I really liked. It's just if you were into those characters, it was fitting for them. Because it's more of a political thing. But, like, the other tie-in ones like Miss Marvel and stuff, or Moon Knight, were good. And I'd watch them. It's just not like WandaVision, Loki level stuff. So we've heard in the news that they've acknowledged this and want to retool their behind-the-scenes thing, that they were running these like movies when they should be running them like TV shows behind the scenes with the full staff and everything. Number 4 out of 10, Star Wars Ahsoka. Preston and Carmine didn't really put that high on their list. They felt it dropped it. Nostalgia does go a long way if it's done well. That I was invested in the Star Wars Rebels cartoon for years. Watched the whole thing live. And you can tell this is what Dave Filoni was planning 10 years ago. 8 years ago. That everything that show was meant to set up was meant to be this, which in turn is setting up a movie about Thrawn. But fair enough, it feels like for once, oh, he has a plan for this. That it was Thrawn, just... Since I was 10 reading Heir to the Empire, I've wanted Thrawn in a thing, and just, if there's one commander I would follow to the freezing gates of hell and back, it is Grand Admiral Thrawn. He doesn't rule through fear. He is a competent commander. And he built us up. Grand Admiral Thrawn. Shit in my face. It's Thrawn, man. I love every minute. But also, it's nice to see these are the live-action versions of the Star Wars Rebels cast and what happened to them with everything. So, was it the greatest Star Wars thing? No. I think the bar set below Andor, of course. Andor is the best show they ever made. Season 1. Mandalorian Seasons 1 and 2, depending on what you think, both were roughly the same level of quality. That Season 2 was also pretty good. Worked in Ahsoka, worked in Luke. Season 3 was clearly the weakest season, and they could end it here without shame. But I'm willing to accept maybe the upcoming strike fears and other problems were messing with them behind the scenes. Sometimes you just have an off year and then you bounce back. But let's not pretend there isn't a problem. Just let's approach this calmly and rationally that you kind of need to improve from this. So I did not. Sometimes I double things up here that I didn't want to use two spots in a top 10. So number 4 is Ahsoka, subset honorable mention for number 4 is Mandalorian season 3. Like on paper, structurally was fine, and the acting was good. The stunt work was amazing. Like they deserve every stunt award. And dealing with it, there's different factions of the Mandalorians. Some are conservative and orthodox, some aren't as much. It's just, it needed a little more polish than that, and I'm willing to accept things got rushed because of internal problems. I don't know. But rests on its laurels a bit. So top spot goes to Ahsoka, but it's also, we went from Andor, which I was watching over last Christmas, to then in spring, Mandalorian 3 was quite a drop. But we were talking about it, and even if it's controversial, we're still talking about it. So we'll see where they go from there, and I understand, yeah, it's set up for a movie. I understand it's part of a wider story, so whatever. So, I mean, Preston and Carmine really didn't even put it in their list at all. I'm like, well, we were talking about it, so whatever. Number 5, which is Wheel of Time Season 2. I didn't watch any of this, but I trust other people who have been talking about this, like Preston and others. He watched it, Carmine didn't. In Deep Geek and other people said, this drastically improved from Season 1. That this is the most improved show award goes to Wheel of Time Season 2. Many thought it not possible. The Season 1, well, they stumbled out of the gate, but they'll turn it around. Then they actually did. And tell me if you remember, even at my last thing, I said, they openly said, we made this at the height of the pandemic, and it hobbled our ability to do what we wanted to do in some scenes. Fair enough. I will give you a pass for it, and sometimes you need to find your footing. It is a beloved fantasy series. Much as the Manderleys will never forget the kindness of the Starks, we as Game of Thrones fans will never forget that in the mid-90s, when there was this dense, kind of mature and shocking book, Game of Thrones, coming out, who gave it a boost? George R. R. Martin's friend, Robert Jordan, was willing to put a promotional blurb on the back cover that I'm writing the Wheel of Time series, and I think this is an amazing book you should read. And Martin himself has said, I owe so much to Robert Jordan. The Jourdains of the Tor, this House Jourdain in Dorne is named after him. There is a lot of friendship there. That the Wheel of Time fandom did so much for us when we were just getting started out. We won't forget it. So I like to help where I can. I said, give them a shot. It's an interesting world. They're doing some stuff with it. And there's been this big discussion. I remember In Deep Geek did a whole video on why is Season 2 so much better. Not even is it better, but why is it better. And loosely, it's a combination of the pandemic hurt Season 1. They got a better feel for it. And even book readers think it only really hits the ground running by Book 2. That Book 2 really gets interesting. So all these factors combined. And the example I used for Carmine when I told him, like, I see this as real competition. He's like, what? And I went like, well, if you're like an NFL football team playing against a peewee team of 10-year-olds, that isn't competition. That's what Season 1 was compared to House of the Dragon. Now, it's like if you're the Dallas Cowboys or something, the New England Patriots or one of the other major Raiders or something, if you're one of the top teams of this year going against the Denver Broncos, and you score 4 touchdowns against their 2 touchdowns the whole game. We won by 2 touchdowns, but they weren't like literally tripping over themselves. They just weren't that. We beat them, but we had to exert ourselves. That it wasn't I was playing a child. I had to exert myself, and we easily won by a decent margin of not 1 but 2 touchdowns. But they are not doing shamefully. I would mention them in the same sentence, as opposed to like other things that kind of came and went. Like, does anyone even remember like that Cursed show? It just came and went. Oh, this will be a thing to look at, and it fizzled out. And like, yes, Wheel of Time season 2 turned it around. Again, most improved award. People, the fandom that it has is enjoying it if you're fans of their book series, and it's doing decently enough that I wouldn't like think it's silly to mention it among major fantasy shows of the genre coming out around this time. Another big thing that just I'm spoiled. I peeked at little scenes behind the scenes and YouTube clips and stuff because I didn't read the books. I don't have time. I'm so busy with everything. But I appreciate I'm spoiled for the whole story. I know what it is. Book 2 is when they kind of turn things on their head from this classic, oh, it's the chosen one in this pseudo medieval Europe thing. Season 2, if you haven't watched this, is when they introduce Shan Chan, which is really fascinating. That's the thing I kept looking for YouTube clips of is... Now remember, the Wheel of Time world is our world eons in the future, after there's been a cataclysm, multiple cataclysms have made magic come back into the world. That it's something like the world goes through 7 ages, and they're like in the 3rd age now, and the Age of Wonders before this they vaguely hear about was the 2nd age, and the 1st age is implied to be us. Not unlike Adventure Time, where there's this disaster, the Great Mushroom War, and they just go, there was a disaster and magic came back into the world. It completely rewrote reality. But, like, they hint that this is the very far future in a distant eon where magic has come back into the world of our world, but totally reformed and stuff. Whereas George R. R. Martin has said Westeros world is nothing like, it is not connected to our world at all. Small difference, I know, but they sort of imply that Shan Chan is their version of the Americas. Because if you think that they have the Westlands, which is their main continent, it's this big pair of continents, one large one with subdivisions across the Western Sea, which colonizers from the Westlands went and settled and built this vast empire fueled by slavery there. And it's sort of this interesting idea of how would you make a medieval show version of the Americas? Well, what's the most ancient thing in the Americas? Like conquistadors, Spanish conquistadors. So it's like this mix. Every culture in Randland is this interesting mix of other cultures. And their version, and for Shan Chan's case, it's like this weird mix of Spanish conquistadors with Imperial China, with the Ottoman Empire, this vast slaveholding empire. They have American accents. And it's jarring, that's the literal thing. And he even said in the books they're supposed to be Texan accents, that he has this whole thing where he has this blender of all the different cultures and stuff, but just how different Shan Chan is, and how their take on magic people is we enslave them and use them as weapons, and it's just how different it is from the main country, but it's a colonial power. Shan Chan was generally really interesting. That's one of the other things that, as Robert over on Indeed Geek said, is that's one of the other things that's why Season 2 is considered such why the second book is considered so much more interesting, is it's when Shan Chan is introduced. And they're playing around with concepts in that. So yeah, that was interesting. Just, it's new and different. It's not just rehashing things. So Wheel of Time, I put it number 5. If you didn't think it was that great, this is a subjective list, it's a fuzzy list, and on top of that, it gets bonus points because it has the most improved award, that this really turned it around from Season 1. I've been rambling about this for a long time, but I think this has crossover appeal for other fantasy fans. Quickly, honorable mention for point 5 here, not really honorable mention, is people were talking about The Witcher Season 3, obviously, this summer. The last we'll see of Henry Cavill, but hanging over it like a cloud was we knew he was leaving, we knew he disagreed with the writers on Season 2 and was brave enough to say it. I have seen mixed reactions to Season 3 itself, which is to say not wholly bad, but everyone was trying to latch on to Witcher Season 1 because it came out right after Game of Thrones' bad ending. We thought maybe this will be something, and Henry Cavill's a great actor. I don't know what the future holds for that franchise. All their attempts to make spin-offs have not done particularly well. There was that one live-action prequel didn't do well. They've even made a few cartoons. I feel bad for this, is again, the Witcher fan sites really helped us out when we were doing casting and filming reports for House of the Dragon Season 1. like Redanian intelligence. I want them to recover to the point where they have a presentable show for the remaining seasons that adapt the later books, and they're going to make other spin-offs and prequels. I thought it was encouraging that Andrzej Sapkowski, the guy that wrote the Witcher books, announced that while the story has concluded, I like to think in part because Martin was having so much fun writing prequels about the Targaryens and Fire and Blood, he said, I'm going to write a new book, but it'll just be a prequel about one of the other historical eras just for fun. And, have fun with it. Have a prequel. Don't make a sequel to when you have a definitive ending. Just round out prequels. Like Lord of the Rings can't have a sequel, but there are numerous prequel eras of, like, Gondor's history that would actually be a pretty good idea for a thing. Or the history of Rohan. Prequels are a better thing. Just, why not? Have fun with it while you're still here with us and can produce them. I want him to put out more content. Still, Witcher Season 3, that the whole thing was considered a downward trend, that it wasn't, Season 2 was just an isolation. Season 3 didn't turn it around to Season 1 levels to the point the actor is leaving. And let's not forget, Netflix also dropped the ball on Shadow and Bone, which got surprisingly good viewership. I actually saw it was like one of their top 10 things during Season 1 of it. Season 2, they pressured them to make changes, then canceled it after the changes had a backlash. Same thing for The Witcher. So, I'll talk about this at the end, but you'll notice there's a trend here that Netflix has been dropping the ball on everything. Not just The Witcher, but Shadow and Bone, and it's part of a pattern of they're not really doing well with this. And it's not, it's a mistake. It's a one-off random thing. It's you aren't managing them well. That just let them do their thing. Don't introduce changes. So that's why the number 5 one most improved is Wheel of Time actually did turn it around. As I said, this is just a broad guideline. The back half of this wouldn't be in my final top 10 combined with animation, but 6 through 10 of live action are just other things we were doing just to round out a top 10. For Apple TV, Foundation Season 2. Because everyone who's seen it says it's so much better than Season 1. I just finished Season 1. I'm going to move on to it. If I'm compelled to review it, I might dash off a podcast a month from now. I doubt it. I'm too busy. I'm a giant fan of the books, and I've read the print off of them. I can quote them to you. I mean, I have them on my bookshelf level fan. Just I casually reread parts of it on a lazy Sunday afternoon or something. That I settled in after Season 1 into, okay, this is a loose adaptation, and I really respect Goyer, the writer Dave Goyer, that right at the beginning of this, in the interviews, I looked up the interviews when it started, he admitted point blank, honestly to us, if I made a literal adaptation of exactly what happens in the books, they would never have let me made that. If I tried to write that, they wouldn't have let me make it. I had to change and condense things around. Like, some of the crises are condensed together, the stuff they're doing with the second Foundation. Then again, Asimov himself was playing around with this when he got to Foundation's Edge and Prelude to Foundation, so who are we to talk? But the acting is great, the production value is great, and so far at least, I think they are sticking to the spirit of Foundation. Taking as a given, and they said in advance, this is a loose thing we had to rework to be this way, and some of these changes work very well, like the Cleon dynasty being a series of clones was a great way to keep the Empire one actor that the audience can connect with while still showing the passage of time. And it even tied in with the theme that they say in the first episode that you've grown stagnant and static and you don't grow anymore. That actually worked really well, also because he's a great actor. But other things I felt that they jumbled around too much, just the condensing, and maybe they needed to. I mean, in the books there's the 4 kingdoms, Anacreon, Smyrno, Laris, and the other stuff, and they sort of just made it Anacreon and Thespis, for example. That works. As, okay, there's 2 barbarian kingdoms fighting. The stuff they tacked on with Gale and Salvor, particularly by the late season, of how they're related, and I wish they had done it a different way, but we'll see where they go with it. I mean, it's not bad, it's just different. And if some people are going to yell about, they race-swapped certain actors that they're black, or certain characters are women now, that Gail Dornick is a black woman now. Asimov's writing really had nothing to do with it. He wrote characters as thought experiments who were like, this character is the mathematician, this one is the general, and their gender or race is irrelevant. I can't even remember if Gail Dornick had a physical description in the book. I mean, I know it was a man, but it could have easily been a woman. That it isn't relevant to the plot of their social function is what makes them important. I actually really liked Gail after they showed that her home planet is this water planet, that the sea levels are rising, and their local religion is getting so dogmatic they refuse to see it, and they're killing scientists because they're apostates, and she managed to sneak her way off the planet by joining a math competition. Tied in with the themes that Asimov was doing very well. I was actually moved by that episode. It was like watching Socrates being executed when they execute her mentor, who says that your belief will not save you, only knowledge will, and they kill him for it. So that was fine, that worked. Oh, and other things like going, I've heard that in season 2, Belriosi is gay and married to another man. Again, that has nothing to do with his characterization in the books one way or the other. I don't care. That I don't think they ever even mentioned if he was married or not, or what if he never had relationships in the book. It was his function is the general. And if you want to add in these other bells and whistles for a modern show, that's fine. It doesn't really affect the core of what the story was about. And I've heard people say, no, Belriosi was actually handled really well in season 2, so I look forward to that. This isn't that the online bigotry needs to yell, like, making a certain character gay or a woman or black or something, particularly with Asimov's style of writing where it's like a puzzle, does not affect the show. And in season 1, it really didn't. What bothered me was when they said, like, oh, Salvor is related to Gail Dornick, regardless of gender. It's like, you're tying it in a little too much, compared to in the books, it was a series of mayors who were elected. But it works well on its own. It's just, I wouldn't have done it that way. But I walked in expecting a disaster, and it was decent, and I understood that they are struggling with, these were really hard to adapt, because they're not written in it. There's time skips in them. They're written as novellas set centuries apart. And I trust that people said that season 2 is really good, even though I haven't seen it yet. And it was fueling a lot of discussion. I've seen part of the top 10 list here is what fueled discussion, whether you liked it or not, and it did do pretty well. So, honorable mention goes to a show I actually did just finish, on Apple as well. Monarch: Legacy of the Monsters. Just because I'm a big Godzilla fan. And this is another one of those cases of Most Improved Show Award, because my benchmark is how good the 2014 reboot movie was for Legendary that started the Monsterverse, where they treated it like a real horror movie. It's supposed to be scary. And the humans in the story were decent. Even though you're there for the monsters, but the human drama was decent enough to be presentable and you're reasonably invested in them. That slacked off a little in the Ghidorah one, King of the Monsters, and then got downright bad in Godzilla versus Kong, where you're really just watching for Godzilla, Kong, and Mechagodzilla, and the human stuff is just a total distraction. It felt tacked on. They weren't even trying. It wasn't even a horror anymore. Though I still love the fight scenes, it's not what they... So there was a real downward trend in the franchise. I really was expecting this to be a flop. I watched because Kurt Russell and Wyatt Russell were in it. I liked Wyatt Russell from Winter Soldier. And it was surprisingly good. And I looked around at other reviews before I did this. Other reviews were going, this was a surprisingly good show with real human drama. They took the idea seriously. They treat Godzilla and the other monsters as a horror movie thing, as a threat. That, like, the main character girl, like, she was a teacher whose bus full of children fell off a bridge when Godzilla destroyed the Golden Gate Bridge. She just jumped out the back and thought the kids were following her, but before they could, the bridge collapsed behind her and the bus went down. And she's traumatized from it. Like, they are treating this seriously. Kurt Russell did a pretty good job. I mean, it's him doing a fun cameo, basically. It's not like the best role he's ever done, but he was treating it seriously because he's professional, so did his son. And it's like someone sat down and wrote a really good fic for this franchise that was to course correct it, that was going off the rails a little. And it was a really good fic. You know, like when you read a fic where you go, I know this is retroactively trying to make everything better, and I can't get out of my head that it's retroactive, but they did a really good job of it. That not just Godzilla, but also tying in with the King Kong movie and just, well, what was Monarch's history like as an organization. And it's not going to win any acting awards anytime soon, don't get me wrong, that Foundation's probably going to be the bigger show on this, more widespread. This isn't like a Succession or even Wheel of Time scale acting thing. But as a TV show for a sci-fi fan, if for the subset of Godzilla fandom, this was arguably the most tight writing we've had since the 2014 movie. So most improved, this was surprising that you took it seriously and did a really, relative to what you expect from a Godzilla project, did a pretty good job. So I enjoyed it start to finish, and I hope they get a second season. But that's honorable mention. It's a bigger thing that, you see, I'm putting the cause above myself, that even though I haven't seen Foundation, I'd feel weird putting Monarch ahead of it, because I know people thought Foundation Season 2 was a lot better, and I trust Preston and Carmine. 7 out of 10. And again, this is just rattling off the list. Star Trek actually had a pretty decent year at Paramount. Problem is, it's on Paramount, and I don't get that. A lot of people don't. They're going to sell it. I like to hope that when Paramount actually does sell in the next year, there'll be a big boost to Star Trek by being on another platform. That Season 3 was better than 2. Some say better than Season 1. It's the last season. This was the only season that gathered together the whole crew, 7-person crew, including Worf, Geordi, Beverly Crusher, actually concluded the story arc of Picard and Beverly's relationship. And again, it's one of those things where it feels like a loving fic that fans wrote. But, guys, Next Gen was never that serious of a show, if you remember how goofy it could be at times. So it's like, it felt very Next Gen. So can you really say this wasn't a fitting show to be its final season? That it felt like it went out on its own terms and was better than that Nemesis movie thing, and with hope for the future. And they go, and the adventure continues with these other characters. They worked in other characters from Voyager, not just 7 and 9, but also Tuvok did things, brought in bits of Deep Space Nine. Tell me you didn't feel it in your heart when, like, Worf just mentions in passing, oh yeah, Odo told me, because we know, Renee died, but the Odo, the character, is still around. They just don't have him on screen. But a loving send-off to the entire spin-off 1990s era of Trek that I grew up on. Picard Season 3 wasn't trying to be television. It was its own thing. It was a reunion special for people who were mega fans of this other show. And if you were a mega fan of Next Gen, it was very Next Gen by its own measure. Good for them. But it's ending. And I kind of hope they get a Star Trek Legacy. I thought they did a good job with that. But the other big thing this year was Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 2, which has been very well received as well. And that's what Star Trek should be. It was this classic Trek of we're meeting people, meeting characters, going to new planets, not just rehashing old stuff. Works very well. I've seen bits of it, haven't seen the whole thing. People liked it. Preston and Carmine also gave it an honorable mention because they haven't really been following it, that it is hobbled by being on Paramount. Even though Paramount's the home of Star Trek since I Love Lucy. Lucy was, promoted it back in the 60s at Desilu before they went to Paramount, all that. So, in terms of my it's weird that my benchmark for sci-fi fantasy TV growing up was Star Trek, like at the Hugo Awards. It's grown beyond that, but good for them. They're going strong. I don't blame this. I didn't really get into Discovery. Discovery survived multiple showrunner changes. It was sort of like, wow, we're a revival after 10 years of cancellation. Like when you reboot a comic series for like X-Men or something, you go, let's try a bunch of different things and see what sticks. So it was all over the place because it was trying to be experimental, and I don't fault them for that. And you kind of need to do that. Just we fell on our laurels. Let's try all sorts of different things. Let's see what we can do. We needed that, and we needed Picard as the capstone to everything. We needed him to come back in these dark times geopolitically, to have that. Growing up, that Picard was this man in authority who doesn't yell, and he made it a point not to yell, that he is rational and dignified, meant so much to me growing up, that we needed Picard to have this better ending, and we got it. But I think the future of this is with Strange New Worlds, and I hope they do well with it. Preferably when they merge with something like Warner Discovery so people actually watch the damn show. Because there's nothing else on that platform. Maybe Yellow Jackets. Okay, there's also like the Yellowstone Empire, but they're not. This would be better served merging with another streamer. Number 9 for me, again, this is where I'm just rounding out my list, is a toss up between either Good Omens Season 2, which is another good Neil Gaiman adaptation with David Tennant's wit, or Netflix's surprisingly good One Piece adaptation. I was not into the original anime, just not my taste, I'm more into hardcore sci fi. But that after a string of flop anime live action projects like Cowboy Bebop, how do you screw that up? That was meant to be a live action thing. This more cartoony show than Cowboy Bebop, they actually did better. And they said we want to run like 5 or more seasons. They want to run a lot of seasons because it's a very long running manga. Good for them. I mean, I'm not a fan, but I appreciate the fans were pleasantly surprised at how good it was. So that's another thing everyone was talking about, and it's one of the few good things Netflix did this year. I'll talk about that later. And number 10 is a toss-up between either Amazon's Gen V spin-off of The Boys, or, if you're so inclined, Yellow Jackets. Yellow Jackets is more niche, but did a little better at award shows. And some channels do follow it very closely. I think Season 1 was apparently really good. I don't know if Season 2 lived up to it. This might have been a one-hit wonder. We'll see how Season 3 does. Like, how they juggle the two timelines is very complicated. Again, hope they do better. This was a Showtime thing when Showtime wasn't really big anymore. Did better once they put it on Paramount Plus, but I hope Yellow Jackets and Star Trek do better when they're on other platforms after they merge. Number 10, therefore, is probably Gen V, because it was more widespread. And I watched Season 1 of The Boys, really liked it. I just didn't have time to keep up with it. The gross-out humor was a bit much, but I just loved how it was a satire of corporate-sponsored celebrity culture, that celebrity actors and showrunners work for corporations who have a whole PR department meant to make them look good. But the basic concept that, like, Homelander has a PR team that writes his Twitter feed for him, and people just don't realize that he's a terrible person in real life. So I like, of what I've heard in the later seasons, just I haven't had time to catch up on it. But good for them. I don't know how many more seasons they intend for The Boys, the main show, to run once the Season 4 comes out this year. I don't know how long you can keep that going relative to... I know they expanded the original comic. It's even better than the original. And they want to keep making spin-offs. Maybe they'll have a second spin-off, I don't know. But good stuff. I wasn't myself watching. I wouldn't put it in the top 5, but in the top 10, it's something people were talking about in this relatively off year in the post-boom. Like I said, all of this is academic because I'm now going to list off the top animated shows, then merge them into the final best shows. And before I move on, in case anyone yells about this, yes, I am aware that Doctor Who had an amazing Christmas special this year, a pair of specials, tying in with the return of a showrunner, a change in direction. David Tennant briefly reappeared, caught up on some old storylines. That actor managed to come in right before he died to just be there again, the grandfather, and then regenerated into a new character, new Doctor, the 15th Doctor. Let's see how he does with Ncuti Gatwa. Let's see how he does. I don't consider that a TV category. I never do. If there's just a one-shot Christmas special, that doesn't count. It's subjective. I will play loose with this. Last year for 2022, I counted The Expanse because the last 2 episodes aired in January. Because I didn't do a 2021 list, I wanted to talk about it. But Doctor Who, I will put on the list of most anticipated stuff for next year, lumping in the Christmas special. I don't consider that a full season yet, even though we were talking about it. Plus, it came out at the last week of the year. So that's the other... If it was a special in the middle of the year, maybe, but a one Christmas special at the very end of the year that wasn't really 2023 to me. Apples and oranges, this is just where I choose to make the cutoff point. So that's why Doctor Who wasn't in my top 10. And if you want to bump something else out of like number 6 through 10 and put Doctor Who Christmas Special, be welcome to. Like, maybe you'd think that was more talked about than Star Trek, probably, in terms of viewership numbers, but whatever. Moving on to animation, the top 10 animation. How far am I into this with no edits? 54 minutes. I'm surprised I haven't need to stop a cough, but animation. Top 10, and this is stricter at the very top 2 or 3 are what I consider the top 2 or 3. And like I said, 6 through 10 are just all honorable mentions, basically. But number 1 animation of the year, Attack on Titan ending. I'm surprised that Preston and Carmine didn't mention this because, well, it's the final season, part 3 of 6. We really mean it this time, that they kept extending it, which I'd rather they do than truncate it. That they go, it's season 4, the final season. Wait at the last minute, we need a part 3. Wait, part 3 needs another 2 parts. They concluded the story finally. I think the absolute last special, it was a pair of specials that ended it. The absolute last special, I think, aired in Japan in December or something, though the American dub aired on Adult Swim. I saw it on Adult Swim with the English dub, like second week of January. It was 2 weeks ago I saw it. And it just wrapped everything up really well, while at the same time, like, the ending is war will always be a part of humanity and the human condition, and intolerance will always be there, and we sort of addressed it in this generation, but we didn't fix anything. That the characters who survived got to have a happy ending, but they do a flash forward just showing there will always be war in later generations. They didn't magically solve all of our problems, which I think was a really fitting ending. It was a commentary on all of that, and on othering people and intolerance, power dynamics, just all of that stuff. So it worked really well. Some people felt the manga was was late, so it was rushed. They smoothed it out in the anime version. And in terms of what people were talking about, this really broke through to mainstream. Mainstream things were talking about Attack on Titan, not just the anime crowd. Now, of course, that Sony bought Crunchyroll and Funimation and merged them together. That's the monopoly in town now for animes, Crunchyroll. That they've, if you buy a DVD, Blu-ray, it's called Funimation, but anything Funimation has, they make under the umbrella of Crunchyroll now, which is all under Sony. But I would loosely put that under Max, because Max owns Adult Swim and it airs on Adult Swim, if you had to pick one. So the only disappointment was that whole feeling of this was a perfect ending to an amazing show we've been watching for a full decade. What do we do now? Like the opposite of everyone frustrated at the end of Game of Thrones. This was really good as an ending. It's that feeling of, where do we go now? Like the feeling I had at the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy in 2003 of just, this is the end of an era. And, people asking, what'll be the next Game of Thrones, except what will be a good Game of Thrones. It's like when Death Note ended. Oh man, what'll be the next Death Note? I don't know. Tell me in the comments, what do you think the next really big hit anime on this scale potentially could be that's in a manga form? I am behind, of course. The people, word on the street of people who are reading the Shonen Jumps and the mangas who really know this thing everyone's really talking about, like Goblin Slayer, maybe? I don't know. I'm not up to speed on any of that. I'm really far behind. The big story was Attack on Titan's ending was really good. Not just that it was the ending, but it was a good ending. Number 2, Invincible Season 2 on Amazon. Some people would put this at point 1. I wouldn't, simply because it's Season 2. Season 1 was the one that made the big splash of, wow, this is amazing, it's an adult animation, it is violent and mature, but it's because it's good. Right, it's showing, if you had someone as powerful as Superman who could run through someone at super speed and turn them into a cloud of meat, that is horrifying, that isn't fun. So it's what the boys did without the sex satire. That it is brutally dark. And the only reason this is number 2 is Attack on Titan was an ending. And whereas Invincible wasn't the first season, it was season 2, though it was still good. Probably more people are seeing and talking about Invincible. It was on Red Team Review and Preston's lists as well. Obviously it's a split season because it's taking time to make. We don't usually get full hour animation. But, so they've been releasing it in spurts. I mean, there was an episode 0 special for season 2 where it was, we're going to shift focus from Mark, Invincible, to the female lead. It was the origin story, prequel story of Adam Eve. And her origin story from that she was experimented on in the womb, she can control matter, her mother and all of her siblings were experimented on. It was such a dark and bleak episode that without embarrassment I can say rarely does stuff actually make me cry, as the backstory episode for Adam Eve was just so gut-wrenching and bleak. At the end, when she makes the family photo showing what her family would have been like if they weren't mutated science experiments, man. So, the other stuff with Invincible's going on pretty well, with the Viltrumites and his father and space and stuff, and that's I'm not going to list that in the top shows of 2024 just because it counts as a 2023 show because it started then, again, playing it loose. But the top two there are really Attack on Titan and Invincible. I don't think there's any division over those choices. Number 3, though, I'm surprised Red Team Review and Preston they said they didn't watch it and were dismissive of this. No, number 3 is Rick and Morty Season 7. Was one of the standout animated shows of the year. I'd rank it right behind Attack on Titan and Invincible. If you haven't been paying attention, look at all of the animation review channels like Animation Roundtable, Ostrich Vox, Johnny Two Cellos, a couple of other big ones. I like the way Johnny Two Cellos summed it up in his review. He started off, he had a video titled, "Was this the best Rick and Morty in 5 years?" That the way he phrased it, the opening line was, low-key, under the radar, without much fanfare from mainstream news outlets who'd grown bored with them. They put out what's probably their strongest season since Season 3. That Season 3 is still my gold standard, where they had the season arc where they start off with him in prison, then he escapes, and the Galactic Federation takes over. The season arc was the divorce and the therapy. Pickle Rick was the big metaphor for therapy, and that Season 3 premiere was amazing, where it's the Citadel of Ricks and destroying the Galactic Federation, and it introduced the idea of Rick Prime. But in such a way that it was a memory and he was lying, but he was only half lying, that he said, I was making up some of the details to misdirect you, but it later turned out he was only 90% telling the truth. It's just that he lied about, I didn't immediately start going on hedonistic adventures, I was grieving for months and then eventually went on a campaign of revenge. But just as presented in the mystery of, and everyone's debating for years, what exactly happened with him and Rick Prime? How did he develop portal technology? How did he come to meet the current Morty's family? What is his backstory? And they gave some of that at the end of Season 6, of course. That was the Season 6 finale. But Season 7, the brilliance of they have this final confrontation with Rick Prime, aided by evil Morty, in a mid-season episode, because they said, that's how you subvert expectations well, that it was everything you'd expect from a season finale, they just put it mid-season, and then, dear God, they roll the music from Season 1 when they jump dimensions for the first time in Rick Potion number 9, and just how stunned he is that I've killed my arch-nemesis of the past 50 years, the man who killed my family, now what do I do? And the rest of the season's just him kind of being in a haze about what happens now. And the finale was also really strong, because it was like a dream, but it dealt with his grief of his memories of Diane, his wife, would it mess up him and Morty. Just overall, in terms of writing quality, there wasn't a single bad episode. It was really good. Advanced all the story arcs. My complaints since Season 4 were you set up all these story arcs in Season 3 that you didn't follow. They did in this season. These are things I was waiting for since Season 3 to really follow up on. And what's beyond the central finite curve with Morty. When you see the real metaverse, it's horrifying, because if everything is happening everywhere all at once, you just see 3 slightly different alternate families in rapid succession telefragging each other, because they're all trying to teleport to the same place over and over again, because infinity means everything is happening at the same time. That is horrifying. Just physically. I'm rambling here. It was a really good season. And Season 4 and stuff I really blamed. They said one of the other writers died in Season 4, and they were really messed up by it. And they recovered. It has been getting better ever since Season 4 and 5, when they hit a low point. Season 6 was a really strong season. Season 7 was even stronger. And let's address the elephant in the room. The big shadow hanging over this season was the high-profile controversy over firing Justin Roiland, who does double work as voicing both Rick and Morty. He voices both characters, both titular characters. But from all of the extensive hard evidence and texts that have come out, phone text logs and such, it's not just that this guy Roiland was a total creep, unrelated to his work, but that, let me think how to say this, his dirty mind and short attention span were actively harming the show. From things the writers themselves, and they feel bad about, they used to be their friend, but all these interviews I've been following with Harmon said that Harmon was trying... I could always feel, watching the show as it progressed, that there was a constant tension, just from watching it, between Harmon's attempt to tell subversive, satirical, but clever sci-fi stories filled with wry meta-commentary, like from Community, this wry meta-commentary on plot devices and like the story lore and stuff. A tension between that element of the show and Roiland's uncontrollable need to ad-lib poop jokes. And they talked about this in interviews, that like, we'd be trying to tell stories and he'd just be ad-libbing for so long on, and here's Mr. Poopy Head, but I think the Mr. Poopy Butthole thing is funny because he's a fake name, but he actually was a real person. It made sense the episode they introduced that that's how he got shot. They thought he was fake. But that anytime you just see him going on a tangent, saying curse words and dirty words and McBoogerades or something, stopped being funny, and it was just, you are so unfocused on this. And the other writers in interviews saying, we almost just credit him as a co-creator out of courtesy. He's really just the lead voice actor and he ad-libs a lot, but this is Harmon's show. And it really felt like that in terms of, I am here for the story arcs. I am here for that level of thing, and oh well, this show has turned to crap. Why can't we have more old-fashioned season 1 adventures? What the hell does that note even mean? More season 1 adventures. The story arc, long-term stuff is what mattered, and it felt like Roiland was detracting from that. Now the thing is, they did say Roiland did record for most of season 7, so it's not out from under his shadow. It's, we cut a lot of the ad-libbing and had these other really good voice actors come in to do the roles, and they did it well. It just sounds like, again, how Johnny Tuchello said, it's like how Marge's voice is getting older on The Simpsons. You could have, if you didn't know what was going on, you would have mistaken it just for the actors getting older in the passage of time. Worked really well, and that, again, from Johnny Tuchello's, by the end of the season, when you could tell that they had run through whatever Roiland did, and it was just the new voice actors allowed to improv on their own and deal with the script, it was really good. Even more so. Of course, next season will be the real test of, they will be writing it from scratch without Roiland. But they said Roiland barely wrote anything. He was just ad-libbing it in the booth, telling poop jokes. But my big complaint since season 3 was actually, not conclude, but advance the story arcs with Evil Morty and particularly Rick Prime, and wow, did they. And not just that, all of the other episodes were really wry commentary, even like the one about the spaghetti suicide episode deserves an Emmy for that montage they did, and just the wry, clever thought that went into it. There was not a single bad, seasons 4, 5, and even 6, I always felt there was one bad episode per season, but if they had 9 good ones and one bad one, I thought that was a good ratio, because everyone has one messed up episode they don't like. This was firing on all cylinders, so don't take my word for it. Look at the online animation fandom community. Johnny Tuchello has a whole video about this, that Red Team Review and Carmine hadn't been following it. This was like one of their strongest seasons in years. I was surprised. Oh, it was a little better. This blew me away. And it's unfortunate that people are, can they reverse the damage? It'll never be as popular as it was in season 3, just because it's not as new of a show anymore, but this was really good, and they are contracted through season 10. Oh, one thing we do know is because of the effect of the writers' strikes delaying everything, they just officially said season 8 will not come out in calendar year 2024. I know that means it'll come out in spring of 25 instead of fall like usual, I'm not sure, but those were the top 3 things by a wide margin. Attack on Titan ending, Invincible, Rick and Morty season 7. The rest of this is just rounding out the list. I wouldn't even put these on the top 10, but number 4, back in spring, Genndy Tartakovsky's Warriors Eternal. Because Tartakovsky is a living legend. Coming off of his most recent work on Primal, I mean, I really missed that Symbionic Titan got canceled, not much less, like all his other work on Samurai Jack and Dexter and stuff, but after doing the Primal thing, he did some work on this show called Warriors Eternal. And when I watched it, the animation quality is jaw-dropping. That every frame looks like it's out of a movie. I mean, not a Ghibli movie, but it's heavily inspired by those old Fleischer School movies. And it's just, you can just rewatch it endlessly for just the animation work that went into it. This is a man who knows animation as a visual storytelling medium. And what stuns me is he said, I actually didn't storyboard this. Most of his stuff is storyboard. You think if it's visual focused, you storyboard more. He said, I actually went back to scripting because the story is pretty dense. Which is surprising because you think with that animation level he'd need to storyboard it first. He said he didn't. And the only complaint I've seen going around, it's not a complaint, but again, Johnny Tuchelis is one of my big sources for animation reports. The story for Season 1 is relatively light. But in the way that there's just enough there in Season 1 to give you tantalizing hints that there's a rich backstory waiting to be explored. I mean, the opening 5-minute montage where they show these heroes keep getting reincarnated in every generation, and he's even said, I have a 4-season plan. I am going somewhere with this, and if I wanted to do spin-offs, I could just make one-shots in the other eras. That you get the feeling there's potential stories more than they've actually delivered yet. But the same could be said of a lot of Season 1s, such as, look like Steven Universe Season 1, where you could see the potential, you could tell they're going somewhere with this, but they haven't really followed up on it yet. Even Samurai Jack Season 1. So, keep an eye on that. It feels like this is a master in his element. The animation quality alone is amazing. Story's a little light, though they are likable characters. Is it really a complaint when you say, oh man, I wanted to see more of them? That is a compliment. When you want to see more, you tantalize this, but he said it's a 4-season plan. I am going somewhere with this. We'll round out stuff more. So, they're going somewhere with it. Purely, if this was an animation top 10, with Tartakovsky in there, he'd be in the top 10, but this isn't going to be in my top 10 of the year overall, just because it's more about the animation quality than it is about the story. Number 5, again, moving down the list, and again, this is, I wouldn't say nostalgia, but comebacks done well earn points. Number 5 is Fiona and Cake bringing Adventure Time into a whole new era at HBO Max. That Adventure Time ended, I was sad it ended, it dragged on for a few more seasons, but they said we always knew what the ending was, we just didn't want to end it because we were in love with it. Which is why the ending to Adventure Time was really good, because they said we always knew what this is going to. We're going to have this story for. This is where all the humans went. This is Marceline's backstory with stakes. This is the bubblegum war that's going to end it. And I really got frustrated with the show. Everyone did by like season 7 through 8 or 9. And then they really turned it around the last 2 seasons, and they just said we went on a little longer than we should have, but fair enough. Then they did those specials on Max, which were good. But you always get the feeling Adventure Time is going to be really story-focused, and they set things up, but then don't really follow through on them, and I feel bad about that. But Fiona and Cake, it's not that it was mind-blowing, but it was a good reintroduction, a new, different era for this. They're playing around with it. How do they explain... They actually finally explain where Fiona and Cake come from, that they are in-universe fanfic by Prismo. And he said, well, I write what I know, and I like Finn and Cake. I like Finn and Jake a lot, so I made Fiona and Cake. Made sense. And it's a little more adult because they curse. But overall, they just got renewed for another season. It's not going to knock any doors down. It's more Adventure Time, but as opposed to tired more Adventure Time, it was a revitalized Adventure Time with new characters, so we're talking about it, among animation circles at least. Leading to point 6... The return of Futurama. Yet again. This time on Hulu. And it can be hit or miss, but when it works, it works. Like with the episode about following up on 20 years later what happened to Kif and Amy's kids. And other episodes as well. Like when it works, it really works. Will never be the success of the first 4 seasons just because it's an older show. I mean, the Comedy Central seasons were hit or miss, but then you'd have something like the late Philip J. Fry. This has felt like that, where if you have like 5 good episodes out of a 10-episode season, I am in love with these characters and stories and this world so much. It's my sense of humor. I grew up with it. That fine, let it, as long as I get a few stories that I like. Overall, I consider this a win. So I hope that when Disney merges with Hulu next year, it's going to spread the show a lot more, because it'll be on Disney Plus in general. So 5 or 6, depending on how you rank them. Fiona and Cake bringing Adventure Time back, Futurama coming back. Just, it's an old missed friend. Not going to be in the overall top 10, but I missed it. Number 7, Harley Quinn Season 4. It's a consistently really good show with really sharp, funny writing, crisp animation, nothing earth-shattering. It's just, I always thought this is one of the better animated shows coming on right now. Number 8, Blue Eye Samurai. I haven't had a chance to see, but everyone is raving about it. George R. R. Martin himself said he really likes the story. It's not really animation, but whatever. 9 or 10, you've got like Scott Pilgrim. Blue Eye Samurai is Netflix. Also, number 9 or 10, Scott Pilgrim, which also on Netflix. These are like the 2 animated things Netflix did after they gutted their animation department. They're really outside projects. But I was genuinely surprised. I thought it was going to be like an animated version of the movie stretched out over many episodes. And then it turned out the twist in the first episode, it's an alternate universe timeline kind of thing, which makes sense for something so meta-narrative as Scott Pilgrim, that they're always, like, even in the movie, they go back in time at the end. But this time it's Scott who disappears, or Ramona who has to find him. It shifted more to her. So it was playing around with the Scott Pilgrim verse with the same set of voice actors from the movie and everything. Was innovative and surprising, but that's a one-shot. It's not going to keep going on as a franchise, like the way Adventure Time or Futurama will, I don't think. That was a one-shot. And also on here from Max, we have Scavenger's Reign, which, light on story, but, it looks like one of those old-time Mobius drawings from Heavy Metal and stuff. I want a more solid story to something, but, that, and if I had to make another number 11 honorable mention, would be Marvel's What If Season 2. Which was marred by poor advertising. Like, even the names of the episodes didn't reflect what they were actually about. I really liked Season 1. So, but again, like, only the top 3 are really in my ultimate top 10 list. These are just rounding out a top 10 list of the top 10 animations. And if there's good anime out there I don't know, please tell me. Carmine said, I made a note of this, he said that among his top 3 shows in general were Foundation Season 2, Loki Season 2, and Frieren. I'm mispronouncing that. The thing about the immortal, like what happens after the quest to save the world ends, and the fantasy hero party disbands, and the immortal elf characters lamenting that they'll outlive all their friends, as a slice-of-life character study thing. That's an interesting idea. I just haven't seen all of it. But were there other interesting anime or manga that, this will be the next Attack on Titan scale, Death Note scale thing we're really into? I don't know. So, in conclusion, I am now 1 hour 15 minutes into this. In retrospective, what were we watching in 2023, the off year, where we had no Westeros content for Game of Thrones-oriented channels? My combined top 10 shows of the year, live action or animated, and again, I don't like ranking animation differently, but it does get categorized differently in terms of what are Emmy rivals and stuff for award show scale things. Top 10 combined shows of the year. Number 1, The Last of Us. Number 2, Loki Season 2. You might argue which was higher than the other. Obviously, Last of Us swept the awards it was in whenever possible when it wasn't against Succession. Take your pick of The Last of Us or Loki Season 2. Number 3, I would put Ahsoka simply because it's a more discussed show if it wasn't exactly that great, compared to Loki and The Last of Us. Number 4, Wheel of Time Season 2, because it gets bonus points for Most Improved. A comeback story is so rare. When it happens, it's great. Number 5, Succession's final season, just because everyone was talking about it, even though because of the Venn diagram of taste clusters overlapping, we don't really, like Red Team, Press, we don't really watch it that much. I'm watching it to see cinematographers and directors from this said they're going to go to House of the Dragon because it's also at HBO. Whatever. Last of Us, Loki, Ahsoka, Wheel of Time, Succession. And the bottom of the list, take your pick, are Attack on Titan Final Season, Invincible Season 2, Rick and Morty Season 7, Futurama Returning is number 9. Number 10, I would put as a toss-up between Star Trek Strange New World Season 2 and Foundation Season 2, only because I haven't seen Foundation Season 2 yet. Everyone, like Carmine said, Foundation Season 2, he said Strange New Worlds gets honorable mention, but Foundation Season 2 is a lot better. I trust his judgment. So let's put that as Foundation Season 2, honorable mention, Strange New Worlds. Maybe. But these are the shows that we were watching in the past year, and some of these were final seasons, like Loki. Ahsoka might not get a Season 2 because it's turning into another show under a different name. When it shifts into being a movie, Succession ended, Attack on Titan ended. Will The Last of Us Season 2 live up to Season 1, because we know the video game is very different? I mean, it'll be good, it just won't be as good. I don't think it can ever be as good as the tight writing and the newness of this world with this fungal infection. I don't know if they'll be able to top that. It'll still be good, it'll still be popular, just not as good. As opposed to, like, a long-form fantasy series. Like, if you said Wheel of Time gets better, I believe you, because it's building to a climax across multiple books. Or it could at least get better. Versus it's an original show. How do you know Season 1, like Yellow Jackets, how do you know it wasn't a flash-in-the-pan, one-hit wonder for Season 1? Then again, even established book series like The Witcher can have internal problems, crash and burn. Hard to say. I mean, I do think House of the Dragon will get better every season, because I know what happens in terms of the story elements. Season 1 was just setup, and it was still really good. So I am now hour and 20 minutes into this, but I did it as a podcast so you can listen to it long form. This is about as long as Carmine and Preston do theirs. I hope I haven't been rambling too much, but it's a full year in review. I am going to make a separate state of the industry video about specific news about who's buying Paramount and Netflix, but I'll do that quickly here for 10 minutes as looking at our top 10 lists of these are the shows we were discussing on YouTube. How did everything do by platform? As I call it in evolution terms, by clade. That there's 7 major streaming services, but Peacock doesn't have anything we were talking about, so it's really 6. And in terms of their bigness, and it was stunned to realize there's nothing on cable I watch anymore. Like AMC has had maybe, I know that their Interview with the Vampire was very well done, well received. I saw the first episode, just from a technical standpoint, it was very well done and acted and filmed. It's not, the next Mad Men or something. And when you have things on Max, I lump those in as, okay, this count. When you have things on Adult Swim, this counts as a Max thing. Okay, so for like Warriors Eternal or Venture Time or whatnot. Similarly, Hulu I lump in with Disney because, so there's only 6 platforms that we can really discuss. How did they do relative to each other and to themselves? And this is the quick version of the state of the industry, that because I'd have to repeat, these are all the shows I listed off. Look at what Disney had this year. They had Marvel and Star Wars. They've officially had trouble breaking beyond their core IP. Mandalorian was below expectations, and Ahsoka was decent, but people wanted more. It wasn't a breakout hit like Andor. I don't want to knock on it, but the real problem was at Marvel, where they had their first outright, you can't whitewash this failure for Secret Invasion. But things were turning around. Like, they hit rock bottom after Secret Invasion came out at the end of summer, where they had Mandalorian wasn't well received, Secret Invasion wasn't well received. If you cut off at the end of this summer, Disney was not in a good place, Disney Plus. But then they started turning it around, that Ahsoka was a little better received, and then after Ahsoka came out, Loki Season 2, which both Carmine and Red Team Review felt were show of the year, up there with Last of Us, take your pick. And I'm encouraged by all those articles going around that they know there was a problem, and they are undergoing a major behind-the-scenes revamping process to start running. That we used to run these organizationally like we did a long movie. You're supposed to organize them like a TV show production. They haven't been doing that. Obviously, this is a change they're just making now, so we might not see the ripple effects of this until well into 2 years from now. Like, anything in production now was still made under the old model. So we might still have a few stinkers to go through, but that's just the nature of the beast. That's as long as the time it takes to implement change. So, relative to itself, Disney had what you call as a rebuilding year, because there were some problems, but I see choices being made to address these problems. There is a plan. Let's see if it works. And their biggest problem was, we have trouble expanding beyond our core IP of Marvel and Star Wars. They are addressing that directly in that in coming weeks, if not months, 2024, they are officially merging with Hulu, which means because Hulu is also in part owns FX and FXX, all of these, when I think of dark original sci-fi drama shows and stuff like Legion and other things that were out on FX or on Hulu, will now be absorbed into the Disney Plus umbrella. Case in point, I don't know if it'll air on Hulu or it'll just plain air on Disney Plus by the time the merger happens, but that upcoming Noah Hawley TV show set in the Ridley Scott Alienverse. Though he said it's more focused on the corporate backstabbing of Wayland Yutani and stuff, but I trust that guy after what he did with Legion, and their big thing was, we need something beyond Marvel and Star Wars. How about have an auteur filmmaker make a Ridley Scott Alien TV show universe thing by Noah Hawley? That is a plan. That is a good idea. That actually has me hopeful for Disney Plus. So rebuilding year, but there's reasons to think they're turning it around or could turn it around. At the other end of the spectrum, the network I think really lost this year in terms of quality of programming was Netflix. Relative to itself and to other platforms, Netflix had one of the worst things, that they mishandled The Witcher. They mishandled Shadow and Bone. They gutted most of their animation department. Yes, on my top 10 list of animation were two things they had with Blue Eye Samurai and Scott Pilgrim. Those are like the only animation they have left. And just the graveyard they have left of other projects by the wayside. This is one of their worst years in terms of content. I'm going to talk about this more in the dedicated the dedicated State of the Streaming Industry video. Ironically, they've had a really good financial year, but it's because of a couple of other factors like cracking down on password sharing, and because during the strike when there weren't other new shows, they're like the only other streamer that has a truly international base, so they could just churn out Korean shows or European, German shows in your algorithm feed to keep them going. So in terms of financially, they're ironically doing really well for now. But in terms of their original content has taken quite a dive. Other big shows they had on the awards level, like Ozark's over, The Crown just ended, Stranger Things has its final season, and their next big thing is doubling down on Three Body Problem by Benioff and Weiss. So it's an odd mix of, this was a really good year for them financially, and I'll go over the numbers on that in the next video. In terms of their original content, there came a point where I realized I have more need to watch more shows that were out on Apple TV this year than I did Netflix, in all seriousness. But of the top streamers, that's Disney, that's Netflix. Amazon, meanwhile, I kept saying, well, Disney had problems, but at least they have said we have a plan, we are implementing it, of restructuring everything, restructure the production on Marvel and Star Wars, plus get in FX Hulu shows. That's a plan. Amazon, in contrast, is hit or miss, but they're sitting on a pile of money from their main shipping company. So I've seen this in other interviews, people leaving Amazon saying they have no internal plan whatsoever. Not a bad plan. They have no plan. They just throw money at random things and aren't even trying to build a brand style. But despite that, because they have infinite money, if you throw enough money at it and you have that support base that Disney and HBO could only dream of, you're bound to get something right. That I have to genuinely say, in terms of, overall, they might even be losing money. In terms of they don't have an overall strategy, but still, some of the best shows this year, admittedly, came from Amazon. The Boys spin-off Gen V was well received. Invincible Season 2, in terms of animation, was better animation than Netflix ever put out this year. And Wheel of Time Season 2 really managed to turn it around, and we're starting to hear better rumors about Rings of Power Season 2 actually getting the rights to do Silmarillion stuff as backstory. We'll see how that works, but focusing on what we have in hand, that Wheel of Time Season 2 was objectively better, compared to how Netflix The Witcher was getting worse. So Amazon certainly did better than Netflix, despite having no plan, if only by throwing a lot of money at things. Those are the top three, but I think the real winner this year had to be Max. The combined Warner Discovery Max. I hated the name HBO Max because it isn't HBO. It's the Time Warner catalog, including all their cartoons. And yes, Zaslav had to cancel a lot of things to break even because they were heavily indebted, but look at their top shows are still their top shows. The Last of Us and Succession dominated up until the writer's strike. And then, while they have slashed a lot of their animated content, they did make an Adventure Time continuation. They put out Scavenger's Reign. Of course, House of the Dragon will be coming back. So, in terms of who did best this year, I still think Max did. Disney, bit of a rebuilding year, but they have plans. Amazon arguably did better than Disney, depending on who you ask. Just luck of the draw. Netflix clearly lost, though, in terms of what we're looking at here. So my ranking would be something like Max, then Amazon, then Disney, then Apple, then Netflix. Which leads me, of course, to the also-rans, Apple and Paramount, which Paramount I'm not even putting on the list. That of the other things that it's, Apple did surprisingly well. That we thought the strike would cripple them because they have zero unscripted content, but Foundation Season 2 was well received. Godzilla, Monarch, Legacy of the Monsters was a pretty good show. I haven't started watching Silo. I know it's a book adaptation, but people like it. For All Mankind, also well received. It's like 4 to 5 good shows they have. And that morning show thing came back. So, while Apple is the smallest, they're doing a lot better than Netflix. They didn't fall on their face relative to their size. And of course, they also have Apple, the computer company, to prop them up. That they're going for being a smaller scale, high concept show. Like they're out HBOing what HBO used to be, high end concept things, which is good if you're relative to yourself. Paramount, I'm not even beating a dead horse, that they are failing to the point that since I scripted this, they are openly trying to sell to someone else to merge with them. They can't survive as an independent thing. And the only things I'd really say from it myself are Star Trek and Yellow Jackets, though their most profitable things are all those westerns they put out by the guy that made Yellowstone, and that Bass Reeves show looked nice, but people watch those. I'm not invested, but I know they're very popular. I just want Star Trek to be on a better streaming, more widely circulated streaming platform. So like I said, my ranking of all these guys is Max, Amazon, Disney, Apple, Netflix, then not even registering are Paramount and Peacock, in terms of which streaming platforms did the best. And a big theme here is, while I think the other ones are competitive, Netflix is going to have huge problems. That they did financially well this year through a series of tactics, but their overall strategy with their original content is getting increasingly unhinged ever since they got rid of Cindy Holland, the lady who invented their original slate since 2013. And yes, they're the other people have to pay to put stuff on their channel. HBO paid Netflix to put Sex and the City on it, because people who wouldn't be willing to pay for HBO Max would pay for Netflix, and they'd make money from licensing it. It's complicated, but they have a really good international setup. What if the other platforms eventually catch up with that? It'll take some time. I don't know. But these were the top things we were looking at this year. I think hour and a half podcast to cover a full year of TV isn't too bad. I didn't go 3 hours on this. In terms of what we were watching, what we weren't, top 10 are Last of Us, Loki, Ahsoka, Wheel of Time, Succession, Attack on Titan, Invincible, Rick and Morty, Futurama, and Foundation, I guess. Could any of this be the thing competing with House of the Dragon? Well, a lot of these ended. As for the ones that didn't end, Last of Us won't be airing against Season 2 in the same Emmy cycle, and I don't know if Season 2 will be as successful as Season 1. I do know that Andor Season 2 will be directly competing with Season 2, but then Andor's the final season. Overall, will Star Wars be able to keep up that level of quality with all their other projects that are having problems? Wheel of Time is the comeback story of the year, that Season 2 was better, and people are actually taking it seriously as a show, and it will be quite a long show, because it was a long book series. But then on the animation front, which is not the same thing, you have Invincible and so forth, and I don't know how long Foundation intends to run. I need to see Season 2. They told me it turned around. I don't know. Moral of this video is, just as last year I said the only things that were big enough they were on my personal radar I'd make my own review of in case you, my subscribers, want to know, what did I think of Andor? What did I think of Sandman? I made standalone reviews for those last Christmas break, because even George R. R. Martin was saying Sandman is an amazing adaptation. And I hope that comes back. That is another Netflix project, Sandman. Could they turn it around? Well, they are buying up. That was a whole other topic I wanted to get here. Here's a paragraph in my notes. Could Netflix eventually turn it around? Well, if they stop making stupid decisions like that, the shows they've ruined, they've already ruined. And they will officially have a problem after Three Body Problem bombs in March. But coming this fall of 2024 is Arcane Season 2. That thing's going to go off like a nuke. And if we get Sandman at the same level of quality, Netflix is so huge that it will never, shut down the way Paramount is shutting down. It'll always be there, it just won't be utterly dominating as a near monopoly, but be one of the top 4 to 5 actual streamers that survive the streaming wars. Not that that's a bad thing, it keeps competition going. We need to contract to the point there's only 4 or 5 of these. We're down to basically 6. And we'll see what happens. So I predict that, like how Disney had a bad year this year, but then by the end we're showing signs of, all right, we acknowledge the problem, we're going to make a new strategy. Netflix is going to hit rock bottom by this summer, but might be turning it around if they start restructuring in fall around other hits they do have, like Sandman and other things. I don't know if they're going to recover from losing their animation department, but they have strong international sharing for all the European and Korean shows that the other streamers just don't have. I really do not think they know what they're doing at Netflix leadership, but they're so big they're bound to get something right. Talk about this more in the State of the Industry video that will follow this. Sorry if I've been rambling, but I needed to rush this video out, and you may be surprised, I recorded all of this in one take with no editing. That's why it rambles at points. I did not have time to edit it. That's why I've been rambling a little. But I'm going to be making after this comes what are going to be the top anticipated shows of 2024, because we only just started and there wasn't really anything out in winter season. State of the Industry, mostly about Paramount and Netflix, behind-the-scenes money details. And I am going to make a standalone review of The Last of Us, the 5 things they did right that Game of Thrones did specifically wrong. That it was a perfect season, I just don't know if we'll ever be able to make another season that matches up to it. But please subscribe to hang around to see those too.